Welcome back, class. Let's go ahead and review session number one. In session number one, we introduced the ways we examine the self, examining such things as psychodynamic, humanistic traits, social cognitive, and self-esteem approaches. We'll continue the exploration of those particular areas in these lectures. Basically, we're trying to determine what we share and how we differ. We began with Freud's views, looking at the role of the unconscious, looking at desires and conflicts there. We looked at the techniques for exploring the unconscious, such as free association, slips of the tongue, and dreams. And then we examined the structure of personality, looking at the id, ego, and superego. The id, we're born with that, where the whole point is pleasure-seeking behavior. The ego, where we develop early in our life, looking about how it is that we survive in the real world. And then the superego, which is the internalized societal rules, which happens around 4 to 5 years old. So let's pick back up in our conversation about Freud. We'll start off with a very controversial view that Freud had, looking at his theory of psychosexual stages. The id is focused on the needs of the erogenous zones. The erogenous zones are sensitive areas of the body where we tend to focus on. People feel shame about these needs and can get fixated at a particular stage, never resolving how to manage the needs of that zone. So basically, the notion is this. As we go through these stages of development according to Freud, there's going to be a certain area of the body that's going to be the focus of our pleasure, the erogenous zones. The first stage is the oral stage from 0 to 18 months. Pleasure centers on the mouth, sucking, biting, and chewing. Then the next stage is the anal stage, 18 to 36 months. Here, the focus is on the bowel and bladder elimination and coping with demands for control. Then we have the phallic stage, from 3 to 6 years of age. The pleasure zone is the genitals, coping with incestuous sexual feelings. And that's the one that we have a lot of controversy with, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. After the phallic stage, we have the latency stage, which occurs from around 6 years of age until puberty. This is a phase of dormant sexual feelings. And then the genital stage after puberty on, where we have the maturation of sexual interest. From the name itself, you can determine that Freud's focus was on sex, ergo the psychosexual stages of development he saw as a key factor in the development of one's personality. So, let's look at the male developmental issues. Freud believed that as boys in the phallic stage seek genital stimulation, they begin to develop unconscious sexual desires for their mothers and hate their father as a rival, feeling guilt and fearing punishment by castration, ergo the term castration anxiety. He named these feelings the Oedipus complex after a story from Greek mythology. The story is basically a very simple one. The idea is a powerful ruler at one time went to a prophet or a truthsayer to read his future, and the prophesier determined that this ruler would be killed by his son. At that time, he had a young boy, and he didn't want to be killed by his son, so he took the boy to a mountain somewhere and left him. And unbeknownst to him, when he left the little baby there, another couple was coming by who was childless. They picked up the child and raised him as their own. Going into the future a few years, this boy has now grown up to be a man. He meets a person, a king, on the road somewhere. They get into an argument. He kills the king and then takes over the king's lands and also takes over the king's wife. So now this person is the king, and he takes the king's wife as his queen. It turns out that this was his father that he killed, and now his queen, the one that he's married to, is his mother. So that's the little short story. I'm sure I mangled it up, but that's the core essence of the Oedipus story from Greek mythology. The notion that Freud had was that we could get to resolution or get out of this particular phase of having the father as our rival. And happens when the boy begins to identify with their fathers rather than seeing them as a rival. It should be noted that there is an equivalent type of complex, usually referred to as the Electra complex, for girls in their fathers. Now, the next major thing is Freud offered to us was Freud believed that we are anxious about our unacceptable wishes and impulses, and we repress this anxiety with the help of the strategies below. These are defense mechanisms. So sometimes when we have a bad thought or get into some bad behavior, we tend to feel guilty about that bad thought or that bad behavior. So we have to do something. We have to deal with anxiety in some way. And so what Freud did, he came up with a mechanism he thought existed in us. He described it as a defense mechanism. All right, so we have this defense mechanism helps us to get rid of the anxiety that we may feel because of our behavior. Let's get one that we mostly all probably are familiar with, and that's rationalization. So basically, you find some money somewhere, let's say on the sidewalk somewhere, and you look around, you see there's a person off in the distance that may have dropped it, but you're not sure. You reach down, you pick up the money, and let's say there's $5,000 there. And you'll have sort of an internal debate with yourself. It's akin to your id saying, oh, okay, yeah, we have this money, let's go buy some stuff or have a party. Your superego, which is the internalized morals of your society, is going to say, we need to find out who this money belongs to. We need to return it to the rightful owner. But let's say you do keep that money. Well, if you keep that money, you may have a rationalization about it. And that means you need to make yourself feel better for keeping the money. You could come up with something like this. This is $5,000 of cash, and the notion is that most likely this may be drug money. So I'll keep this money for myself so that I can get back to the evil drug dealers in the neighborhood who will do nothing but continually infest the neighborhood with more drugs. And so what I do is I keep the money. It's a good thing. I can put this money to better use than they can. So let's look at some of the examples we have here. So we have rationalization, which is offering a self-justifying explanation in place of the real one, more threatening unconscious reasons for one's action. So for example, a habitual drinker says she drinks with her friends just to be sociable, not because she's an alcoholic. We have also one called projection, disguising one's own threatening impulses by attributing them to others. The thief thinks, for example, that everyone else is a thief. All right? So they have this thing that maybe makes them feel uncomfortable within themselves that they are a thief. Therefore, when they look out to other people, they project those feelings onto them. So other people are thieves, not just me, even though you're not wanting to really acknowledge the fact that you may be seen as a thief. So let's look a little bit more closely at some of these. Alright, so a politician gives an anti-gay speech, then turns out to have homosexual tendencies. This would be called reaction formation. Reaction formation, okay, where you have switching unacceptable impulses into their opposites. So you don't like having homosexual tendencies, this individual, and because of that, you switch to the opposite. You become a staunch conservative and very, very anti-gay. Someone with an anger problem accuses everyone else of being angry and threatening. Here, that would simply be projection. These two are sometimes confused with each other. The common theme, as with all defense mechanisms, they seek to prevent being conscious of unacceptable feelings. The difference is that the first one compensates and the second one distracts. So one is sort of trying to distract us from the things, and the other one is trying to compensate. So reaction formation is attempting to compensate, and projection is trying to simply distract us from what we have in ourselves. Now, Neo-Freudian psychodynamic theorists. So psychodynamic theorists such as Adler, Horney, and Jung accepted Freud's ideas about the importance of the unconscious in childhood relationships and in shaping the personality, the id, ego, and superego structure of personality, the role of defense mechanisms, and reducing anxiety about uncomfortable ideas. However, psychodynamic theorists differed from Freud in a few ways as well. Adler and Horney believe that anxiety and personality are a function of social, not sexual tensions in childhood. Jung believed that we have a collective unconscious containing images from our species experiences, not just personal repressed memories and wishes. Here's a look at some of those psychodynamic theorists. Carl Jung highlighted universal themes in the unconscious as a source of creativity and insight, found opportunities for personal growth by finding meaning in moments of coincidence. Alfred Adler focused on the fight against feelings of inferiority as a theme at the core of personality, although he may have been projecting from his own experience. The idea here is that what Adler is suggesting was that everything that we do, one of our driving forces is that we feel inferior, and that has a great deal to do with how it is that we develop and who we become. And Karen Horney criticized the Freudian portrayal of women as weak and subordinate to men. So she criticized how Freud portrayed women and his views and theories. She highlighted the need to feel secure in relationships. So moving away from the focus of sex, which was a key focus that Freud had, the people who were still neo-Freudians, psychodynamic theorists, they took certain different aspects and focused on those as opposed to sex that Freud had focused on. So assessing the unconscious, the psychodynamic personality assessment. Freud tried to get unconscious themes to be projected into the conscious world through fear association and dream analysis. Projective tests are structured, systematic exposure to a standardized set of ambiguous prompts designed to reveal inner dynamics. This is an example of a Rorschach test. So obviously, if you look at this ink blot image here, it's very ambiguous as to it's not really clear what it is. So the Rorschach test would be something like this. What do you see in these ink blots? And whatever the patient would say they see or observe in those ink blots, the therapist would then try to interpret the meaning behind what it is that they're seeing. The notion behind this is that whatever you're seeing, whatever you project onto this image, has something to do with the unconscious drives and conflicts that may be in you. And that way they're able to uncover what's going on in your unconscious. The problem, however, results don't link well to traits. In different raters get different results. So it would be ideal if that wasn't the case, but the ink blot does not appear to do what it sets out to. So basically, there are flaws in Freud's scientific methodologies. And that's some of the things that we know now from a variety of perspectives. So first, there's unfalsifiability. He developed theories that are hard to prove or to disprove. Can we test to see if there is an id that he proposes? Not really. So there's no way to really make it very scientific because there's no way for us to prove that he's wrong. Then we have underrepresentative sampling. Okay, he did not build his theories on a broad sample of observations. He described all of humanity based on people with unusual psychological problems. Biased observations. He based his theories on his patients, which may give him an incentive to see them as unwell before his treatment. And post facto explanations, hindsight bias. Rather than making predictions, whether or not a situation makes you anxious or not. You can be either be fixating or repressing. So the idea here, he did not predict how people would turn out or how they would behave. He would say they're behaving this way, and then he would go back in time, so to speak, and say what and how his theory predicts or postdicts what this person is feeling now. So unfalsifiability, making it unscientific. Unrepresentative sampling, which again we saw in chapter 1, does not say that we can make these results that he obtained generalized to larger population. He was biased in his observation, meaning that he was not objective. There are things that he would get out by proving his theories correct. And of course, he did not predict, he postdicted. He had hindsight bias. Of course, as we've talked about in chapter 1, hindsight bias is really good. Hindsight bias is 20/20. It's almost perfect because you already know what has happened. So let's look real quickly at evidence that has updated Freud's ideas. 1. Development appears to be lifelong, not set in stone by childhood. Freud did believe that by the time you're 7 years old or so, your personality, who you are going to become, has already been established. Infant neural networks are not mature enough to create a lifelong impact of childhood trauma. So the idea here is that it's not going to be something that's going to be fried into your brain or set in stone, so to speak, because the networks are too immature for that to occur. Peers have more influence on personality and parents less than Freud assumed. Dreams, as well as slips of the tongue, have many possible origins, less likely to reveal deep unconscious conflicts and wishes. We may ignore threatening information, but traumatic memories are usually intensely remembered, not repressed. I mean, this will give rise to why there are so many people who may suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They don't forget them or repress them. They can't. The problem is they remember them all too well. Still, sexual abuse stories are more likely to be fact and less likely to be wish fulfillment, as Freud had thought. And gender and sexual identity seems to be more a function of genetics than the Oedipus conflicts in relationships with parents.